Ethics is what guides conduct when written rules, organizational incentives, and personal pressure start to conflict, and that conflict is more common in security work than many people expect. Security roles often involve privileged access, sensitive information, and influence over decisions that affect customers, employees, and critical services, so the ethical dimension is not optional or abstract. When a policy does not clearly address a situation, or when leadership is tempted to take shortcuts, ethics is the framework that helps you choose the action that preserves trust and reduces harm. Ethics also matters when incentives push you in the wrong direction, like when speed is rewarded more than safety, or when silence is rewarded more than honesty. A professional code of ethics exists to keep your judgment stable across those pressures, so your decisions remain defensible even when they are unpopular. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISS books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Professional ethics emphasizes trustworthiness, responsibility, and consistent moral judgment, and those qualities are foundational because the profession depends on trust in ways other technical fields may not. Trustworthiness means people believe you will handle sensitive data appropriately, report accurately, and avoid abusing your access even when no one is watching. Responsibility means you understand the consequences of your actions and inactions, including the impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability for systems that real people depend on. Consistent moral judgment means you do not behave ethically only when it is convenient, but apply the same standards when a decision is difficult, costly, or politically uncomfortable. In security, inconsistency is dangerous because it creates unpredictable behavior, and unpredictability undermines governance and erodes confidence in the program. When ethical principles are clear and consistent, teams can rely on your decisions, and leadership can trust your advice even in high-pressure situations.
The International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, often written as ISC², has a code of ethics that prioritizes protecting society and acting honorably and legally. The emphasis on society matters because security decisions can affect more than internal business outcomes, especially when systems handle personal data, financial transactions, healthcare services, or critical infrastructure.
Acting honorably includes avoiding deception, avoiding manipulation, and making choices that you would be willing to explain openly if required.
Acting legally is a baseline, but the code's intent goes beyond mere compliance because legal behavior can still be harmful if you knowingly allow preventable risk to persist.
This priority ordering is important when you face competing obligations because it reminds you that the profession's legitimacy is tied to public trust.
When you understand that hierarchy, you are less likely to rationalize harmful decisions as just doing what I was told or just following the contract.
The code also emphasizes diligent service and competent performance for stakeholders, which introduces a practical expectation that ethics includes doing your job well.
Diligent service means taking reasonable steps to identify risks, communicate them, and support corrective action rather than quietly ignoring issues to avoid conflict.
Stakeholders include employers and customers, but also colleagues and the broader set of people who rely on the systems you influence.
Competent performance matters because negligence can cause harm even without malicious intent, and incompetence with privileged access can be as dangerous as intentional misuse.
Diligence also involves timeliness because security findings that sit unaddressed can turn into incidents, and delayed escalation can increase impact.
In other words, ethical conduct is not only about avoiding wrongdoing, but also about fulfilling the professional obligation to deliver reliable judgment and outcomes.
Another focus in the code supports advancing the profession through responsible behavior. And that matters because professional fields depend on shared trust and shared standards. Responsible behavior includes mentoring, contributing to a culture of integrity, and avoiding actions that erode public confidence in security professionals. Advancing the profession also includes being honest about what security can and cannot do, because exaggerated claims and fear-based messaging can damage credibility across the entire field. When professionals normalize shortcuts, misuse access, or misrepresent evidence, it creates pressure on everyone because organizations become more skeptical and less willing to grant necessary authority. Responsible behavior also includes improving practices, sharing lessons learned appropriately, and supporting ethical norms that make it easier for future professionals to operate with integrity. In this sense, ethics is both personal and collective because your actions affect the reputation of the profession and the trust organizations place in it. Confidentiality is an ethical requirement because security professionals often learn sensitive information through privileged access, and that access creates a duty to protect what you see. Sensitive information can include customer data, employee records, intellectual property, security weaknesses, investigation details, and even strategic business plans. The ethical obligation is not merely to avoid leaking information, but to treat access as a controlled privilege and to avoid unnecessary exposure or casual sharing. Confidentiality also includes respecting need-to-know boundaries, meaning you share sensitive information only with those who have a legitimate role in addressing it. In practice, confidentiality requires disciplined handling of notes, reports, logs, and communications, because those artifacts can contain details that enable exploitation or cause harm if disclosed improperly. When confidentiality is treated casually, the profession loses trust because organizations cannot function if the people tasked with protection become a source of exposure.
Integrity is equally central, and in an ethical sense, it requires accurate reporting, truthful evidence, and honest risk statements, even when accuracy is inconvenient.
Accurate reporting means you do not exaggerate findings to gain attention or minimize them to avoid conflict, and you present facts with the right context and uncertainty where appropriate.
Truthful evidence means you do not manipulate logs, test results, or audit artifacts to create a false impression of control operation.
Honest risk statements mean you describe impact and likelihood in a way that helps decision-makers understand the situation, rather than using language designed to push a predetermined outcome.
Integrity also involves admitting mistakes when they occur, because hiding errors often compounds harm and undermines accountability.
When integrity is strong, leadership can trust security reporting as a basis for decisions, which is essential for governance and risk management.
Conflicts of interest arise when personal gain competes with duty, and they can be subtle because they often feel like normal incentives rather than obvious corruption.
A conflict can exist when you have a financial interest in a vendor being selected, when you benefit from suppressing bad news, or when your career incentives encourage you to prioritize appearances over outcomes.
Conflicts can also arise in consulting relationships, where a professional might be tempted to recommend more work than necessary, or to shape findings to please the client rather than to reflect reality.
The ethical requirement is not that you must be free of all conflicts, because conflicts can be unavoidable, but that you recognize them and handle them transparently. Transparency can include disclosure, recusal from decisions, or formal review processes that prevent biased judgment from shaping outcomes.
When conflicts are ignored, they undermine trust and can lead to decisions that increase risk while appearing legitimate. Due care reflects the reasonable steps expected from a competent professional, and it is a concept that connects ethics to professional standards of performance. Due care is not perfection, and it is not a guarantee of safety, but it is the expectation that you act with the level of prudence and attention that a qualified professional would apply in similar circumstances. It includes following established practices, documenting key decisions, and escalating risks appropriately when consequences could be significant. Due care also includes avoiding reckless shortcuts, such as ignoring basic access control, failing to review critical changes, or accepting major risk without proper authority. The reason this is ethical is that negligence can cause real harm, and professionals with privileged roles have an obligation to prevent foreseeable harm within reason. When due care is practiced consistently, organizations become more resilient because decisions are made thoughtfully and defensively.
Due diligence complements due care, and it reflects ongoing verification that controls operate as intended, rather than assuming that design equals performance.
In practical terms, due diligence means monitoring, testing, reviewing, and validating, because systems drift, people make mistakes, and threats evolve over time. This includes verifying that access reviews actually happen, that logging is complete, that backups are recoverable, and that incident response procedures are practiced and improved. Due diligence is ethical because it prevents the false confidence that comes from paperwork and policy alone, and it reduces the chance that failures go unnoticed until damage occurs. It also supports honest reporting because you can speak about controls based on evidence of operation rather than on intention.
When diligence is neglected, organizations often discover gaps during incidents or audits, and at that point, the cost of correction is far higher, and the trust impact is much worse.
Competence includes recognizing limits and seeking help when necessary, and this is an ethical requirement because overconfidence can create harm. Security is broad, and no professional can be an expert in every domain. So competence includes knowing when a topic is beyond your depth and when specialist input is required. Seeking help can mean consulting peers, engaging legal and privacy experts, involving engineers with system context, or using established organizational processes for review. Competence also includes staying current enough to avoid making outdated assumptions, because security practices change, and what was acceptable years ago may be risky today. Recognizing limits is not a weakness, it is part of professional maturity, because it prevents you from making authoritative statements that are not supported by evidence or expertise. When competence is practiced honestly, organizations benefit because decisions are based on reliable knowledge and appropriate collaboration.
Accountability includes documenting decisions, rationale, and responsibilities for outcomes, and this is where ethics supports governance directly. Documentation is not about bureaucracy. It is about creating a record that explains why a choice was made, what risks were considered, and who approved the decision. Rationale matters because future teams will need to understand context, especially when systems change or when an incident forces reevaluation of past decisions. Responsibility assignment matters because without it, corrective actions drift and repeated issues become normal, since no one is clearly accountable for closing gaps. Accountability also supports learning because documented decisions allow post-incident reviews to focus on improving processes rather than assigning blame based on incomplete memory. When accountability is strong, ethical behavior becomes visible and verifiable, which strengthens trust in the security program. Responsible disclosure is another ethical area, and it balances harm reduction with coordination and legal constraints when security weaknesses are discovered. The goal is to reduce the chance that vulnerabilities are exploited, while ensuring that affected parties have a fair opportunity to remediate before details are widely shared. Coordination matters because uncoordinated disclosure can create panic, reputational damage, and exploitation windows that harm users, especially when fixes are complex. Legal constraints matter because some disclosures are governed by contracts, laws, and professional obligations, and reckless communication can create liability or violate duties of confidentiality.
Responsible disclosure also requires care in communication, ensuring that claims are accurate, that severity is not exaggerated, and that guidance is practical and safe.
The ethical thread is that disclosure should aim to improve safety and reduce harm, not to create attention at the expense of those at risk.
In conclusion, ethics sustains trust, credibility, and reliable security decision-making, and without that trust, the profession cannot function effectively. The Code of Ethics emphasizes protecting society, acting honorably and legally, serving stakeholders diligently and competently, and advancing the profession through responsible behavior. Confidentiality and integrity are not just technical goals, they are ethical obligations tied to privileged access and the power to influence risk decisions. Conflicts of interest, due care, and due diligence shape how professionals maintain judgment under pressure and verify that controls operate in reality, not only in design. Competence requires humility and collaboration, while accountability requires documentation and clarity about decision rights and outcomes. Responsible disclosure then tests ethics in real situations where harm prevention must be balanced with coordination and legal boundaries. When these principles are lived consistently, security becomes more trustworthy and more effective because decisions are made with integrity, and that reliability is the foundation of professional credibility. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.